Write the number the arrow points to as a decimal. So let's have a look at this number line. To get from 0 to 1, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. So each of these lines must be 1/5. So what is 1/5 as a decimal? Well, remember, decimal place values are tenths or hundredths. 5 times 2 is 10, and 1 times 2 is 2. So, because we know that 1/5 is equivalent or the same size as 2/10, we know that that's 0.2 as a decimal, because the first digit after the decimal point is the tenths digit. It's the tenths place value. So here, because the arrow is pointing to 1/5, as a decimal, we write that as 0.2. So where is the arrow now? Well, that's 4/5 after 0, and if 1/5 is 2/10, 4/5 must be 8/10, because 4 times 2 is 8. So 8/10 is 0.8. First digit after the decimal point is the tenths digit. So now the arrow is pointing after 1, so we will have 1 whole, and that's 1, 2, 3/5 after 1. Now 3/5 is the same as 6/10, so that's 1.6, because it's after 1, and 3/5 is the same as 6/10, and the first digit after the decimal point always tells us how many tenths we have. So now the arrow is after 2, and it's 2/5 along, so that's 2.4, because 2/5 is 4/10. Now this number line is slightly different. This time we have 1, 2, 3, 4 lines to get from 0 to 1, so each of these little lines must represent 1/4. Now we can write 1/4 as a decimal by changing it to hundredths. 4 times 25 is 100, and 1 times 25 is 25. So, because we know that 1/4 is 25 hundredths, we know that as a decimal that's 0.25, because the denominator of 100 tells us that we can't go past the hundredths place value, and the hundredths is the second digit after the decimal point. So here, the arrow is pointing after 2, and it's pointing 1/4 after 2, so 2 and 1/4 is 2.25, because 1/4 is 0.25. So where is the arrow now? Well, it's 2/4 after 0, and 2/4 is 50 hundredths, so 0.50, but rather than 0.50, we can just write 0.5, because we don't include zeros if they're on the end of decimal numbers. The other way of thinking about this question is to notice that the arrow is pointing right in the middle or halfway between 0 and 1. And if we know that 1/2 as a decimal is 0.5, because 1/2 is the same as 5/10, we might be better off getting our answer that way instead of thinking about quarters. So here, the arrow is pointing to 3.5, because it's halfway between 3 and 4, or because it's 3 and 2/4, and 2/4 is 0.50, so just 0.5. And finally, we have something that's 3/4 after 4. Now 3/4 is 0.75, because 3 times 25 is 75, and it's after 4, so that's 4.75. Now, if we look at this number line, we have some longer lines and some shorter lines. Let's look at the longer lines first. To get from 0 to 5, we have 5 longer lines. Notice 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these longer lines must represent whole numbers. And that means the shorter lines must be halves, because they're halfway between the longer lines. So 1/2 as a decimal is 0.5 because that's the same as 5/10. So now the arrow is pointing to a longer line, and remember the longer lines were whole numbers. So after 5 we have 6, so that's just 6 wholes. And here we have 0, 1, 2, so that's just 2 wholes. But here we have 5, 6, 7 and a half, so that's 7.5, because 1/2 as a decimal is 0.5. And now we have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and a half, so that's 9.5.